good evening, or if you're on the West Coast, good afternoon. Really excited for all of you to be joining our panel for the National Civic Leadership Forum titled Leading Unapologetically, How AAPI Leadership Leverage Their Cultural Strengths to Promote Change. If you're not already in the chat and haven't shared your name and where you're from, please do so. We'd love to see a polling of where you're all coming from as we start this panel in the next about 15 seconds. Well, I'm going to kick things off for us. Before I let our esteemed panelists, Morna, Roland, and Nikita share their introductions, I wanted to start off by just giving a big thank you and shout out to Meredith, to Anthony, and to Shing for supporting us in doing this panel. So just wanted to shout out all the folks behind the scenes that make all these things possible. To start, I'm Ron Rapatalo. I will be the moderator for this incredible panel of folks who I not only consider colleagues and co-conspirators, but I consider friends. My full-time job is working at Edgility Consulting as a principal. So I bring in business to our search firm that focuses on the K-12 education and nonprofit spaces, but I also lead a number of our searches across the country. So we bring a really strong equity lens to our work. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a child of Philippine immigrants, born and raised in New York City. So it has been a long journey of 45 years, though Asian don't raise in folks. So yes, I know you're all thinking I'm 20. No, I'm 45, although my hair is starting to gray according to my wife. And I'm really excited to be a part of this incredible panel, facilitate conversation with Roland, Nikita, and Morna. So who's up next to introduce themselves, folks?
I can go. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Roland Hanairo. I am currently the executive director of the Silicon Valley Urban Debate League here in the Bay Area. I, like Ron, was born and raised in New York City. I'm a big Yankees fan. Both of my parents immigrated separately from the Philippines. They met in New York and settled there. So I went through New York City public schools and went to undergrad at Brown University, where I started teaching and volunteering at a local preschool. And that was kind of my entree into the education and nonprofit world. Loved what I was doing in terms of helping these kids learn to read, explore the world. And after a few years of that, kind of, reflecting on how I could expand the impact I was making beyond the four walls of my classroom. So I went to graduate school. I got my master's in education at Harvard. And since then, I've been working in education nonprofits for the past 16 plus years. So as the executive director of the Silicon Valley Urban Debate League, our mission is really to empower students, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status, to really reach their full potential and become professional and community leaders by teaching critical skills like critical thinking, communication skills, through the sport and art of speech and debate. So really happy to be here. Also want to extend my gratitude to Meredith and the team, and looking forward to the conversation. And I will pass it on to Morna.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good afternoon. Thank you to this team for inviting me to speak and to meet these lovely panelists you see. My name is Morna Ha. I am a public servant committed to social justice. Currently, I am a consultant working at the intersection of strategy and operations. I am a daughter of immigrants from Korea. My parents came over in the 1970s after the immigration laws changed after 1965 in the United States to allow certain kinds of immigrants to come over more easily. I was born in New York City and I grew up here, but I spent a lot of time in different cities as well. I've been in New Hampshire, Los Angeles, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., and New Orleans. I think for me, it's been important to really understand what's going on nationally because I always assumed I'd be back in New York City, city I call home. Over the years, I've worked for a variety of nonprofits and government institutions. I cut my teeth as a community organizer, working with undocumented immigrant and second generation Korean American young people. I've also became the executive director of that organization. I've spent time working for the city of New York in their disaster recovery efforts. And I've been a legislative fellow for a congresswoman from California. So I'm sure we'll go into more about sort of my journey and my path. The other thing to know about me is that I am a volleyball player, or I was pre-COVID. So if any of you guys are volleyball players out there, let me know. Nikita.
Thanks, Myrna. So again, hello everyone, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm really excited for this conversation. My name's Nikita Sarkar, and I'm of Indian origin, grew up in the Middle East and find myself in Jersey City, chosen to be a naturalized citizen. United States is my home. So I think just in the current zeitgeist, I think this conversation is just so important and personal in terms of what's happening in the world and certainly what's happening in our nation. So I'm really excited to be sharing thoughts with our panelists and everyone who's joining this conversation today. Currently, I work as Director of External Relations at Cornell University. So I sit at the cusp of industry and academia, and it's a really interesting dynamic to see how education really has the impact to change societies and shape minds and create business leaders. I am also a candidate in the executive MBA at Cornell currently. So think a lot about what kind of society are we creating, what kind of business leaders are we creating. And I'm certainly a capitalist. I believe in the power of business, but really the next frontier is, how can we make capitalism more conscious such that we're having 360-degree impact. My personal passion, people adopt babies. I adopt orphanages. I feel very passionate about having grassroots impact. I work with orphanages in Ethiopia and Dominican Republic, and just feel very moved to serve the underserved and the vulnerable of society. So really interested in sharing ideas here today. Thank you.
Folks, if you haven't already picked up on it, there's an incredible lineup here. There's so much that I think what I heard from Roland, Nikita, and Morna's stories that I'm just really excited to dive in with the three of them. So a logistical thing, you probably saw me say this in the chat. I'm going to say this verbally. Feel free to introduce yourselves, your name and your location, and we will take questions at the end around the 10 to 15 minute mark to the end of the hour. So, feel free to use the chat function to also share reflections that you have based on what people are saying. If something resonates with you, co-sign on it, write a little bit about it, right? Because certainly we want to make sure we're engaging with you in that way via the chat. And certainly we'll make sure we leave space for any questions we have from all of you as participants towards the end of this. So I'm going to lead off with our first question, and this is for all of our panelists, is how has your racial and ethnic identity impacted your educational path and professional aspirations?
I can start if I may. So yes, so being of Indian origin, being a geek is kind of a given. So education is certainly extremely important. And if you have half a brain, you're either going to be a doctor or an engineer. Certainly, failed that aspiration for my parents, wasn't extremely motivated to go in there. But then the next was, well, then you must have a master's and perhaps PhD. I think my parents are still rooting for me to get a PhD, but I'm on my second master's. So how has that really made my choices? And in a lot of respects, it is dictated by, the stereotype of you've got to go to school and just the safety net is education, right? Whether it's true or not, and, society is changing so much, and there's certainly such cultural shifts, such economic shifts that we are experiencing. But, coming from India, certainly the expectation is you do everything this linear path, you excel at studies, you get a job, you're secure, and, you know, you retire from the same job, you get married by a certain age, and you have babies, and, you know, everything is pretty linear. Certainly, you know, coming to the United States, I think for all immigrants, it's pretty revolutionary because there are so many choices, right? And then you also have intersection with so many different, you know, races, and it's a really mind expanding, horizon expanding experience. But yeah, still navigating that, you know, trying to be a good Indian while also being a good American and being a good citizen.
Thanks, Nikita, for sharing your reflections. Roland, Morna.
Can I pick up off of that? There's so many similarities, even with different backgrounds and where we're coming from originally. And education was the mantra that was constantly sung at home. You know, my parents, again, they immigrated from the Philippines with this idea that they would help elevate the future lives of their kids that weren't even born yet, right? And how do we give them every opportunity to do that? So settling in a place where we'd have access to great public schools, the community that they surrounded themselves with, the friends and family, Filipino or otherwise, again, all reiterating that point of education and the need to work harder than the next person because we don't necessarily have the same networks or the same cultural capital that some of the other folks who don't look like us or are white or are part of mainstream already have access to. And so it was always education first. Before I could watch TV during the day, I had to finish all my homework. If I wanted to read a comic book that I bought, I had to read a chapter or two in a book before being allowed to do the quote unquote fun stuff. And so it was education all the way through. And similar to what Nikita was saying, like it was very clear that there were professions that they were pushing me and my siblings towards growing up. So I'm the third of 5 kids. Two of my 2 older brothers are both lawyers. My sister is a doctor, and my other brother is a PhD. So I'm the lone person that didn't follow one of those quote unquote paths. And that was hard. I think that there was a lot of pressure to move in one of those more traditional directions. And, you know, when I'm working and teaching at a preschool, I wasn't necessarily making a lot of money. And my dad, being an accountant and a professional, he would do my taxes and he would be like, what are you doing? Like he would see what my income was and like, you went to this university, like I'm expecting more of you. And I remember one time I said, Dad, come visit me in the classroom and I want you to see what this is like. And he did. And ever since that moment, we walked out to the parking lot and I was like, what did you think? And he's like, I'm never going to question it again, because he saw my passion. He saw how happy I was. He saw the joy that the kids brought to my life and vice versa. And so for me, I'm kind of buckling that trend and breaking that mold a little bit and really pursuing what's deep in my heart of making a difference in the community through the power of education. And so the mantra stuck, right? The education mantra stuck, but now it's channeling itself in different ways.
Yeah, all of that, Roland and Nikita, that resonates deeply with me. I mean, I think similarly, I had the whole experience of going to the after school Hagwons, like the programs to do the studying, and my parents were very supportive and encouraging me to move forward in my, to go on to great schools. I think what is interesting, and Roland, you started to pick up on this, is how the education that I received shaped actually my identity and then my eventual professional path. So I grew up in New York City, grew up in Queens, where I was surrounded by a lot of diversity, and being an Asian American was just sort of like in stride. And so I wound up going to Dartmouth College, which is in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is like the polar opposite of New York City in all sorts of shapes and forms. It's rural, it's in the middle of nowhere, and it is a predominantly white, very privileged institution historically. So I think it was there that I really started to understand sort of my place as being Asian American and having a different background. And some of that sort of realization, set me on a path to thinking about, well, what is my story? What is my larger history in this country? Why aren't my stories being told? And I did a lot of work on my campus promoting Asian American studies to be integrated as a minor. I did a lot of work promoting an all Asian American theater troupe. Just ways to have us sort of, for me to think about my identity and how do I fit into this larger picture of this campus and really by extension of this country. And that actually led me sort of down a path of public service. You know, this question of how can I serve communities and make change when people aren't at the table, and how do I get them to the table? And like thinking about sort of the privileges that I've had, you know, as being a US citizen, being English speaking, you know, became very important for me to understand sort of how do I unlock the institutions that our communities need to understand in order to make this large scale shifts towards justice. And so I think my parents were surprised as well. They don't really understand my master's in public policy. I think there's this continuous question for them of, am I eating? Because they don't know that, I think that this question of education and professional aspirations, it's very much also what brought me to those environments, but also how those environments shaped me as a person, as an Asian American person.
Nikita, you wanted to jump in there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just really wanted to underscore, I mean, both what Morna and Roland said. I think what's interesting is this concept of identity when you're straddling two cultures. And for me, it's kind of been three cultures, right? Like India, and then the Middle East, and then the US. And really, it is a privilege, right? Like we get to see two sides and exercise some objectivity versus like being like fish in water, which can't, see what they're breathing, inhaling, living in. So I think that's like a true privilege and just something to be able to step out of like a very linear path. Also, that awareness or awakening is also, I believe, like a real privilege. I mean, I did the whole corporate route, did my first master's, went to work at Ernst & Young, real estate, and the money-making wheel, etc. Luckily or unluckily for me, the market crashed and it was kind of a reset. But Roland, exactly, like your father, when I decided to quit Ernst & Young, I think he had a heart attack. He's like, who leaves, And then to kind of go into, adopting orphanages, it's like, wait a minute, like, who's going to adopt you? Like, take care of yourself first. So there's a big, I think in immigrant societies also the idea of survival, which we kind of have to go against, is it's not just about us and then we've achieved however much we've achieved, but there's so much to give as well.
Thanks, Nikita, for following up on that. And I think about what the three of you have said, something I wanted to explicitly raise, and Nikita, you started to do that, or how our cultural values, and I would argue myths in our cultures have influenced the way that we have decided to lead unapologetically. So Roland, I want to put this question back to you because there was something about the moment which made my heart like shine and feel really good, that when you had your father visit your classroom, he understood. I guess the question I have for you is, what cultural values and myths did you have to unlearn in order to be able to get to that place to teach preschool and tell your father, you know what, like, come see what I do, Dad. This is why I do what I do.
Yeah, college and undergrad for me was this really formative time, as it is for a lot of folks. And I think that I went in with that singular path, with that singular mindset. Education was the key. I started off at Brown as computer science. I ended up failing a whole bunch of classes and getting on academic probation for a year. So it was this moment of like, I'd be walking to the computer lab and I could picture it vividly, and I had a panic attack in the alleyway right before I'd enter, because my entire like education success up until that point was nothing like this, right? I was taught, towards the top of my class, excelled really well. I'd been adhering to this plan of just education first, and here I was for the first time not succeeding. And it finally took a one-to-one with the professor of this particular class, and he was like, computer science isn't for you, and that's okay, right? There are things that you are probably good at and probably things that you haven't yet explored. you owe it to yourself to figure that out. And this particular professor, he came from a family of physicists, and he also had this predefined path for him. But physics ended up not being for him, and he chose computer science. So had it not been for someone taking the time out of their super busy schedules to have this frank conversation with me and kick me in the pants and say, go find your own path. Like, if it's not for you, it's not for you. And so thankfully, I found child psychology, and I happened to live near this preschool that I pass every day. And, part of the cultural ecosystem that I grew up in was also the church and religion, right? Being Filipino and Catholicism being a big part of that, there was this inherent mantra too of giving back to your community and being a giving member of your community. And so that's when I just started volunteering, and I did an AmeriCorps term of service there. And so in some regard, I'm following a path. But again, it took conversations with other folks to kick me in the right direction and help me find my true home.
Wow, that was really powerful, Roland. Morna, there was a lot you said. I remember in your story, you talked about, I couldn't help but think about all the different places you lived and all the kind of, I imagine, rich stories and people that you met. So I'm curious, like riffing off of some of what Roland shared, is there a particular moment or a story you'd want to share about a time that you were in a particular city where like there was a clash between the values you'd learned as a Korean American and how you had to live or experience a particular city?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And if I may, Ron, I just want to sort of adjust it a little bit.
You could do whatever you want to do. It's your show.
So I think a lot about, I know that the sort of the stereotype of a lot of Asian Americans, East Asians are, we're more timid or more quiet spoken and this and that. But I think for me, what really shaped my work from the get-go was like learning and remembering a few things from like my childhood. And I remember specifically my father, he himself an immigrant, had joined a Korean American Civic Association, had been very active. And as you know, a lot of immigrant families are searching for these circles in which to feel supported. And it was a time in the 80s in New York City when racial strife was at its peak. I think it's not surprising. Not much has changed, but unfortunately. And there was a particular incident at a Korean grocery market between a Korean store owner and a black customer. And my father went out as part of a larger sort of effort to protest some of the actions the city wasn't taking on behalf of the whole community. And for me, that kind of stands out in my mind because I remember him asking my sister to paint a picket that said, Mayor Dinkins, the mayor at the time, where is the mosaic? And so in that way, like that I think became embedded in me. A man who had come from Korea, who understood inherently what was right and wrong, and going out to demonstrate sort of his power and his voice, I think stuck with me. I will also share that another moment that really shaped me was when I was organizing in Los Angeles. It was in the 2006 when the country was undergoing massive protests for immigration reform. These were the largest protests to date up until that point. And it was just a beautiful thing to witness and to be part of, to see sort of the intergenerational unity amongst our community and with a larger sort of immigrant rights community. And specifically an elder, Grandma Kim, we marched together and we walked the streets of Los Angeles together. And those two moments just continuously remind me of the power of people, no matter what sort of where they came from, and the passion that people bring to this country. And sort of those are the sort of cultural assets that I draw upon in my work.
Thanks, Morna. Nikita, similar question to you. Having been, well, it sounds like born and raised a good part of your life in India, and then going into Dubai and then coming to America, what cultural assets did you pick up that have allowed you to start leading unapologetically today?
Thanks. Yeah, so actually, even in the Middle East, lived in Kuwait and Dubai. Um, yeah, I think it's all, so being an expat always affords you, well, the downside is you're always an outsider, right? And you're always living two lives. The upside is it really offers you this space of objectivity and awareness, because you have to, right? It's always how are you integrating, how much are you integrating? And I feel very blessed to have had that opportunity. So I think it shaped my personality because it's at a very young age, I took full responsibility of how I have to behave, right? Because I could observe a culture and I'm in it right now, I have to survive it, but I'm also aware of another culture. So it offered me this space to be able to, like, how do I navigate? And again, where does a framework come from? In retrospect, thank God I was able to make decisions which were good and positive and, lean towards the higher truths. For example, just India, it is a third world country and would just see a lot of poverty. And every time I'd go to the Middle East and come back to India and I'd see, people on the streets and, these kids living in like shanties and literally like a car, missing a baby on the street. And I remember ever since I was 5 years old, I'm like, I just want to start a home and take all these babies home. And they're so vulnerable. Why are they on the street? This is not how human beings need to live. And, I get laughed at. It's like, yeah, young girl talking. And now, like, life's come full circles. Now I am still following the passion of working with orphanages. And so that was kind of like a seed planted then. But yes, so in terms of cultural assets, it's like, what you see and then having that objectivity in another culture, major culture, then you can really pick and choose the best, right? And similar to Roland, actually, a very pivotal moment for me was a professor gave me a book. This is when I chosen to step off the corporate career path and had started my own independent consulting and, just being an Asian, excelling at everything, always wanting to be a high performer, go, 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 and was just thinking about what to do with this company and stressing about, hitting metrics and growth, etc. And he'd given me this Buddhist book on, whatever you need, you should give. And it had like all these Buddhist principles. And at that point, I thought it was very tangential, but I actually signed up to volunteer with New York Cares, did a lot of projects in New York City across the board. And I think that was like the best learning of my life. Got to work with like senior citizens, got to work with immigrant, women, integration issues, all of that. And, signed up for like a president's challenge, got a letter from, the Obama administration. But I think that's when I became human and got really aware of just societal and systemic issues, and started thinking about how do we start becoming a part of the solution and how do we start using all the advantages that we've been afforded. Certainly, I feel very blessed and lucky that I've had a chance to live in all these different countries and had this objective awareness somehow to pick and choose what works for me. But then how do I bring that to have an impact on things that I see? And one thing that I did commit to after reading that book is that I will never unsee it. It's easier to just ignore the problems, but you know what? I want to be part of the solution.
Yes, that's the little one. This is what happens during COVID. I'm in my daughter's bedroom. Sophia, oh, please, thank you. I've heard another theme that I think between all three of you has been just really powerful, and that's of giving of yourselves and being of service. Obviously, I think all three of you manifest that in different ways. And something I also want to tie into is obviously this moment going on in 2020, and Morna, you talked about it with your father being involved in protests in the 80s. during the Dinkins administration is all the racial unrest that has come to, once again, another boiling point in this country, right? So I'm curious, for any of the three of you, how have you worked with communities of color in either your volunteer time, your personal time, or your professional time?
I'm happy to start because it is inherent in everything that we do here at the Silicon Valley Urban Debate League, but in my other positions as well. One of the through lines in my professional career so far is how do I help youth reach their full potential? And in my particular position now, it's through the sport of speech and debate. And so, you know, speech and debate, for those of you who don't know, or the field of forensics, it's traditionally been a very white, elite community. And the urban debate leagues were designed and created to counter that and to give voice to folks who traditionally have been silenced. And so for me, it's how do I get our students a seat at the table? You know, I live in Silicon Valley. I have access to, you know, this is the world of Facebook and Google and all, you name it. It happens across the street, but our students don't necessarily get access to that. So for me, it's a lot of coalition building. It's a lot of organizing the community. Who are folks that I know or can get to know at these different companies and get my kids there. So a great example is, you know, Tesla is here. I took 20 kids to Tesla in January. They got to do a factory tour and see how the sauce is made, so to speak. They got to see how the cars are made. But then we had dinner with about 20 staff members from different departments, from the legal community, from the legal department, from HR, finance, chemistry, product assurance, you know, you name it, and someone was represented there. And for me, it was this opportunity for me to share with the students, figure out what you're passionate about, follow your passions, and then find a company or an organization, or create your own organization where you'll be able to thrive and follow those passions. It was just so great for them to be surrounded by all these beautiful people and hear their different career paths and different perspectives. And so for me, it's how do I continue to give students those types of opportunities at all the other companies and all the other law firms or consulting firms, so that they begin to get access to the communities and networks that other folks just have by nature of who they are and families that they're born into. So that's one part. The other part is, in particular, my kids, they're not necessarily old enough to vote yet, right? So how can they be involved, particularly in a huge election year? And we got a group at one of my high schools in East Palo Alto. They're like, you know what? There are, I think it's 8 to 10 candidates for school board. And these folks are going to influence our day-to-day in ways that we don't even fathom as teenagers. But we know that we're learning that it's critical to understand who they are, because the decisions that they're making at that level are going to impact our day-to-day lives at school. And so now they're going to be convening a town hall meeting with these candidates, and our debaters are going to be asking them the questions that are going to pertain to their educational lives for the next 4 or 5 years. And that's awesome. Like, how am I empowering our youth to be involved in the political process, even if they're not old enough to vote? In another group, we're getting students to record PSAs in their native languages, because the particular county that we serve, they're doing some research. They're finding that grandparents tend to listen to their generation the most. And so if I can get their voices recorded to register to vote, to actually vote, and to encourage all of their friends and family to vote, things like that, where they can exercise their voice, they can have their passions heard, trying to find every opportunity that we can through Silicon Valley Urban Debate League.
Powerful story, Roland. It reminds me of a story that a friend of mine shared about how he's Nicaraguan, and teeth health is an issue there. And so one of the ways that they actually got folks to more take care of their teeth was having messages from the youth. And so giving toothbrushes to kids and toothpaste was a way to drive the behavior of the adults in the families. I think there's several examples of that. We as adults follow our kids at some levels, right? It's not the other way around. So that's really powerful to hear, Roland.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, I don't want to overburden that generation with stuff that we created or stuff that we're complicit in, and so we need to continue to be active ourselves in our generation to be civically engaged and get the vote out, get the word out. But you know, from my perspective and from my vantage point, I have the privilege to work for an organization that can help activate some of that.
Morning, Nikita. Anything to add there?
Yeah, certainly. I think, I mean, I really believe in grassroots activism, right? Like it's one thing to support like larger organizations and like create task forces, but I think right now it's really become like the N of one is that's having the power, and everyone just sharing stories and being willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, right? I mean, it's been my mission to really sit with people to you know, be an ally of like what is happening, because some people it impacts directly and then some not so much, but really how do we open up that conversation such that there's an understanding of a shared experience. So you know, just lending my voice is important, you know, having these kind of conversations, being part of various different civic organizations. Certainly, you know, we are part of a, you know, book club, doing the anti-racism, having these weekly discussions is important. Being in an educational institution, you know, as a student as well as an employee, you know, as utopic as it is, I really believe education is the epicenter of where change can happen, because you're really creating these processes and models that can impact long-term change. So really being on these task forces and being part of very active in student organizations as well at the university level. So you know, coming from a real estate background, I've seen firsthand how underrepresented women can be, how people of color can be so underrepresented in that industry. So I feel very strongly about just supporting, you know, female students interested in that industry, being a bridge to make those connections, actively lending my voice, and mentoring, opening doors for jobs, interviews, etc. Yeah, so it's really everything, right? It's like it's a daily commitment on where can I lend my voice, share my story, collaborate with powerful allies, such that we are amplifying each other's work. So that's where I go.
Thanks, Nikita.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I most recently worked in the education sector, and the last few years has been about me sort of working with other people of color communities outside of the Asian American communities in which I grew up. So it's been a really interesting journey to think about racial justice and social justice when working with, for example, primarily Latinx and Black young people and families. I just think about the last few months and working for a community-based organization that runs a network of charter schools. You know, we had sort of the pandemic happened. In addition to that, we had the Black Lives Matter uprising, the emergence of the movement. But we also had sort of a rise in anti-Asian sentiment around COVID, around the disease, you know, the coronavirus itself. And for me, it was interesting to watch, and I'd love to hear other people's input, sort of how you saw that sort of play out in your communities and where you're working, right? For me, it's this anti-Asian sentiment, you know, violence against Black bodies. These are all symptoms of the same white dominant culture that we live in, and racial structure that keeps us all separated, and you know, creates great disparity between white communities and people of color communities. But I, even through my interactions with the schools, you know, it was hard to see how, for example, we were talking about the anti-Asian sentiment, you know, in the classroom. Meaning, you know, did we sort of did the teacher think about curriculum to teach that alongside sort of the historical analysis of the Black Lives Matter movement? And I'm not saying that one is, you know, I think that is a rich conversation around this. And I think that centuries of racism and violence against Black bodies needs to be addressed. But how do we build a movement together that looks at sort of the things that the Asian American community faces alongside some of these other, alongside all the other issues that are taking place right now? So I think that that's been an interesting sort of chapter in my professional life, being an Asian American person entering a people of color space that's not dominated by Asian Americans.
Can I add something, Ron?
Please, by all means.
So I love what you said, Myrna, is, I mean, this moment, I think it's a multidimensional issue, right? So certainly it is about racial injustice, and it is, you know, about like Black Lives Matter, but I see it all interlinked, right? And it really, I mean, you said about like social justice. I would take it so far as to say it's even beyond like color, because if it's not color, then it's about economic disparity. If it's not about that, it's about like sexual orientation. I mean, it's all part of us versus them, right? And just how power is distributed, and you know, the distinction between the haves and have-nots. You know, coming from countries like, you know, in the Middle East and India, where there's such economic disparity, and, you know, there's also like social crises around like the caste system and distinction, etc. I see like the same tones. It's this divisiveness of who is making decisions for who does not, right? And that's why I really feel it's so important, you know, for communities and minorities and persons of colors and to come together to find solutions, because you know, if it's about oppression, it's about power, it's about control, and then it's about abuse of that power, right? Power in and of itself is not bad. It's just if the decisions aren't made for the good of the whole, right? It's if the decisions are only benefiting a few. So you know, I know it's like oversimplifying perhaps, but I just see that the conversation has to be about each, but then it has to be about whole, and it has to be about a critical mass of commonalities and conversation happening together.
I want to say we're probably going to need another panel to discuss how we as Asian American Pacific Islander leaders can be more in solidarity community with other communities of color, especially Black leaders in the Black community. I think we'll have to see if Meredith can get us back together for something like that and get another group of folks here. But what I wanted to do is turn it over to Q&A from participants. So I'm going to ask this first question that, thank you, Meredith, for queuing up this first question that any of the three of you can answer, which is, have you had a recent example of your values and the call to action being in conflict, and how did you manage it? Feels like an interview question, but it's not.
I'm not sure how specific an example it needs to be, but I think the conflict of values is, again, it's like an everyday decision, right? Because the system is set up for us to play by the rules. And anytime you want to raise a contrarian opinion or highlight a flaw, it's seen as a conflict, even when the intention isn't a conflict. And I think for me, a learning has certainly been A, how to take like the emotional edge out of something, but B, not lose the courage to call out a wrong action, and C, hold myself and others accountable. You know, not to be just intimidated by power or be intimidated by status quo. And that's kind of every day. I mean, I can't give an example of like a big like brouhaha and, you know, made like a big organization fail or, you know, brought a team to its knees. It isn't about that, but it's, I mean, just personally as like Morna touched upon, like as a person of color, as a woman, you know, the stereotype is you're timid, you're quiet, you're, you know, being the yes person going with the flow. And every single day it's a choice. It's like, no, I have to lend my voice to causes that are important to me. That's kind of a conflict to the stereotype. That's kind of a conflict to what the system expects a woman's role to be. So I guess that's like an everyday thing, commitment.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think, you know, to sort of stand up for it, I don't want to get into too many specifics, but you put yourself, I've put myself at great risk. There's a professional toll, and that in turn becomes a personal toll. I think there's an emotional toll that happens when you put yourself out on the line. And I think it is worse when it comes from somebody who, yeah, you just don't expect it from, right? Being a woman, someone who, I look younger, even though I'm not that young. And, you know, to be armed with information, that's very dangerous to some people who are afraid to give up power. And I think that that's something to think about as an Asian American in this field, because it's not that you are aiming to subvert stereotypes. I don't think it's that. I think you need to be who you are and acknowledge that there are already stereotypes and biases against you and the way that people are going to perceive you. So I'm not gonna all of a sudden come into a meeting and just be so like loud and over the top. That's not me. But I am aware that there is a stereotype of people thinking that I'm completely quiet and shy. I just want to be who I am, but I know I have to navigate in a world in which people are going to put whatever stuff they want to put on me.
I think that's a huge part of leading unapologetically, right? I think for me, in the organizations that I've worked with, it's how do I not only bring my whole self to the organization, but allow others to bring them whole selves. Like when I ask someone how they're doing, like I do it in such a way that I actually want to know how they're doing, because what they bring to the workday is going to impact them either consciously or unconsciously. And I'm going to take time out of my team meetings, and I did it today, this morning, to ask people how they're doing and understand what they're going through. And if I need to have a one-on-one offline, I will. But I want folks to understand that this is a space where they can share those types of ideas, share that part of their identity, because it's going to impact their work regardless. And for me, I also need them to model it to our students, that they are whole people, that they have racial selves, they have economic selves, they have teenage selves, like all of these different selves that are coming together. How are they navigating their spaces? How are they code switching if they have to? These are things that they unfortunately have to deal with. And so giving them those tools and not being apologetic about it at the same time.
Great. Thanks, Roland. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to riff on the spot and ask the panelists, and any of you can chime in. So, you know, when I'm reflecting on all of the incredible stories you've shared about leading unapologetically, from your birth all the way through now, getting support to do that work, I think, is inherently important. So what support, what self-care do you all need, do you take advantage of to be able to lead unapologetically? Because as Mortar said, there's a immense spiritual, mental, physical cost when you lead unapologetically in spaces that don't want you to.
I think, Ron, I think consistently we don't take care of ourselves. No, I'm kidding. I'll start. For me, physical health is a big part of my life, and I love to run. And this past week or so in the Bay Area has been particularly hard on me because, well, sorry, I don't want to say it that way. the wildfires have been huge, right? And there's been a tremendous amount of loss. And you know, heart goes out to those families that have been impacted, and to the firefighters who are out there helping to solve that issue. But for me, it's physical. It's going for a run to decompress, and being alone with myself, maybe playing a podcast, maybe listening to nothing, and just not having to be accountable to anyone other than just putting one foot in front of the other, and then recognizing that that's a privilege. That's why what happened to Ahmaud Arbery hit me so deeply, because the guy was just going for a run, and for that to happen to him hit me so hard. So for me, it's the physical health and being able to have that time to myself and go for a run every so often is important.
It took me a long time to figure out how to do that kind of care for myself. It really, it took a while. I think for me, and maybe this has to do with the way I was brought up, but you know, my work became me and became sort of the extension of, in some ways, my worth. And so to be able to detach took a lot of effort. I'd say a lot of therapy, which I can say that freely now, which I wasn't comfortable saying before. And I think it is always thinking about, so some of the specific things I learned to do was to fill my different buckets. So my physical, and then the, I don't know, you know, and then I was just been able to use my friends, ask for help, just have a shoulder to just like talk to, lean on. Those are really important to sort of ensuring that I took care of myself in this work.
Want to be useful and valuable for longer, I've got to increase that capacity. So there's two aspects. Certainly the social aspect, you know, having a core group of, you know, people with alignment and the same values and who are all motivated by the same thing, to be able to lean on them is, I found very gratifying. And like Morna was saying, like to be able to take care of all the aspects of myself. So there's the physical taking care, there's the mental taking care, there's the emotional taking care, and then there's the spiritual taking care. So making that a daily commitment with the understanding that, you know, it's heavy work. Like you're letting stuff in and you want to be useful. And, you know, there's, like I said, there's stuff you see which you can't unsee, and you have to keep going back into it again and again. So just recognizing that it's heavy and being kind with yourself just in as much as we want to be kind with for the others.
Yeah, I'm going to take off my moderator hat for a second and riff on, you know, during COVID, you know, one of the things I've done to be able to decompress is take my daughters out to our local park. There's something really energizing about being in nature, even if it is an urban park. It's three blocks away, you know, but the kids get to play. I get to socialize if there are adults around, which there usually are. I also get to the time just like decompress and like not really do anything other than, you know, sometimes take my baby daughter out of the stroller and just hold her. Like it was a little chillier today, so I was wearing shorts in 67-degree weather, so that made me feel really cold, and I had to take my daughter out, you know, selfishly because I just wanted her warmth near me, and there was something just incredibly invigorating and energizing. And there's my oldest, and you see a big head of hair. That's another energizing little one in my life. It's just to spend time with them, right? Because I think what they do is make me realize that with all of the unapologetic leadership I have to do, at the end of it all, they make me realize I don't have to take myself that seriously. Because at times when you lead, there's a certain level of seriousness that you have to have when you're doing that kind of work. And then my daughter just probably, minutes before I jumped on here, was making fun of the way that I talk when I'm on calls. Because all she hears is me on calls at home. And so that kind of like, and then my wife's doing the same thing. And then my baby daughter's like smiling. I'm like, look, you three are in cahoots with each other, seriously? And apparently I say, they're like buzzwords that I say. And that kind of stuff just keeps me going, right? It's that kind of stuff to just remember that, there's a seriousness and gravity of what we're doing, but at the same time, having joy and fun matters, however you access it, right? Because if you don't do that, if we're not working towards leadership and solidarity to liberation and love, frankly, I don't want to be on the other side of it. So we've got 1 minute. I'm going to do a one sentence thing for each of you to end off with around what's the kind of headline or sentence you would leave off with in this panel around leading unapologetically as an Asian American. Ooh, I know. They tell you I was asking that one. Told you I audible well.
I can take a stab. Leading apologetically, I think as an Asian American, or just as anybody, is really just be committed to being a good human being and taking the time to discover what that means, right? I think, and in some respects, like COVID has given us that space. Like a lot of things just aren't working, and we really have had this reset and using it as an opportunity to really, really dig deep into what is it that we stand for, and then doing that work. And then one thing I do want to say is, Ron, you kind of led me there. Hugging a tree is so important. There's nothing more grounding than that, especially for urban city dwellers stuck indoors and, frightened of the world. Just being in nature, I think it's like incredibly grounding and puts things in perspective. A tree's been there for hundreds of years before you and will be there for hundreds of years. It puts things in perspective.
Thanks, Nikita.
I will say something that is very new in reality, and that's just to be your full self and true self and find out who that is and allow others to be that as well. And you'll see the best, it'll bear the best fruit. And one other thing I'll add in terms of how I support myself, it just came to me, is to keep a gratitude journal, because it's so important to recognize and appreciate the things that fill my bucket and bring me joy, and making sure that I appreciate those moments every day. So for those of you who don't have one, I highly recommend. It's just a note on my iPhone. And every day I put 3 things that I'm grateful for. So thank you all for participating in our panel today.
It's beautiful, Roland. Morna.
I would say you do you, but remember that the Asian American community is wide and diverse, and that the panelists here represent one slice of that diversity. Asian American leaders have a rich history, both in this country and from wherever home country or where their families are from. And so to think about that as we move towards a better world.
Yeah. I'll be brief. Be grateful and show grace to one another. So with everything going on, if we don't extend grace, we don't know the situations anyone's living in. So keeping that in mind allows us to be our most human, fullest human self. So thank you all. Nikita, Roland, Morna, thank you for your insights. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your vulnerability. Meredith, Anthony, Shane, thank you for the operational support. Thank you to all of you for joining. Please, share the recording. Let people know if you enjoyed this panel. Give us 5 stars, but more importantly than that, keep living and leading your unapologetic selves outside of this panel. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, Ron, for guiding us through.
Thank you so
welcome.
much, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the
Welcome.
opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.